is a way to understand the statement a little better, to add or refute to that statement, and to begin to look deeper into what the words in the Bible say. So it's sort of like that mantra. I know what you said, but I know what you're saying. I know what you said, but I know what you're saying also. So that's where we're trying to go. But the statement is Christianity is spiritual, not political. Online, how many people agree with that? Can I hear me? Does anybody go ahead? I'm sorry.
I think it encompasses a little of Christianity, encompasses a little of both.
Okay.
More spiritual, but in order to carry out what is going on at the present time, you have to be involved in what is going on in the world.
Yes, exactly. Is there anyone, I got another person who said both. Is there anyone online who disagrees with that statement? Or is there anyone online that agrees with that statement? Okay, so we are in agreement that both are required in order to have. Tanya, you had a question? Oh, I see. Tanya had a question or statement?
I don't agree or disagree. I'm just unsure how to phrase it in terms of saying Christianity is politically spiritual or Christianity is spiritually political. Because as Sister Tommy said, it is both, but I believe that one constitutes the other. I'm just not, I haven't worked it out in my mind yet. Because for the sake of time, I haven't really given it the thought that it deserves. So I don't know if anyone would help me out there and say it's spiritually political or politically spiritual or neither.
I would say that, anybody want to answer that before I put in?
It starts out to be spiritual. But in order to carry out the things that Christianity stands for, it's necessary for it to be involved in politics. That is not the major goal, but it is a byproduct of Christianity and what we are about.
Okay.
We should be concerned about children being deprived of their food while food is rotting in a warehouse.
Right.
And people are not allowing it to be distributed.
Right. So
have compassion.
Right.
Thank you for adding clarity to that. I totally agree. Yes. Thank you.
And so what you're saying then is that Christianity's spirituality influences our political stand. Is that right?
Yes. And yes.
Okay. I agree with that. So we're saying that Christianity is spiritually political, or we can say that. Next slide, please. So in this book, I've just taken out excerpts. Again, here's the book, Jesus, The Politics of Jesus by Aubrey Hendricks. And I just took out, just different excerpts of what he's had to say, because so far I'm in agreement with a lot of what he says. And in this statement, a passive, uninvolved Jesus just did not make mistake. He opened his book by explaining his spiritual or church-going background. And he emphasized the fact that, he was taught to, or he grew up with the white, blue-eyed, long-haired Jesus, or the one who looked meek and mild and didn't cause a stir and everything like that. And he knew that the Pharisees were bad guys, but didn't really know what the Pharisees were. And then he grew up and began to think about what Jesus was really doing, what Jesus was really saying. And then things started to shift. And that's where he came up with the sentence in this book: a passive, uninvolved Jesus did not make sense. A Jesus who cared about not only our souls, but about our earthly realities.
Right.
So that goes to what you and Sister Tanya said, Sister Tommy, how it's almost impossible for Jesus not to be political if he cared so deeply about the people. So
Right.
last week, Pastor Byrd said what made him political, what made Jesus political, was that he dealt with the people, and the people instigate a movement based on Jesus's liberation, or Jesus' edification, or building them up, letting them know who you are. You're the daughter of Abraham. You're the son of God. You're a child of God. And that began to change people's mindsets. And that is what made Christianity what it is, the largest religion or faith that we have. So next slide, please. So there's no way Jesus could do it. And I think either I said before, somebody said before, maybe I wrote it or read it, I don't know. But Jesus touched people who were not normally touched. He spoke to people, he looked at people, and that gave them personhood, that brought up their value. And that's where they got the gumption or the nerve, for lack of a better word, to go ahead and speak up or speak out. So this is what, and I'm thinking about the demonstration that we plan to go to on June 10th at the White House, where we are demonstrating for a moral budget. Trump and the people, the powers that be, have a budget, and they're cutting Medicaid, and they're cutting SNAP, and they're cutting other social programs that most of the least of these benefit from. And they're doing that without considering what would this do? What would taking Medicaid do to the least of these? What would taking SNAP benefits do with as a result of our cuts? And what it is the demonstration is advocating a moral budget, a budget instituted by Christianity, a budget that's influenced by the morals and the mores that are in the Word. So I do all of this to, in thinking about that. And then it sort of makes me think that we, as Christians, as the children of God, as the siblings of Christ and emulators of Christ, that we should really look at ourselves and see how we can improve on being the people that Christ and God want us to be, looking after the least of these, following and looking after the widows and the orphans, and not necessarily the widows and orphans that are actual widows and orphans, but understanding that widows and orphans were marginalized. And so widows and orphans are representative of addicted people, homeless people, women, anyone who's marginalized, anyone who's on the outskirts of the core of society that we tend to look down on or look beyond or just act like we don't look at all. So that's what I'm thinking we should be concentrating on. And this is one way to prove it. So we are saying that, yes, we get that Jesus is political. Next slide, please. Oh, no, that one. Okay. The revolutionary Jesus calls many back to church because he is not just presented as meek and mild. He is presented as a real life change agent. And many young people, the churches are talking about, how do we get young people in? How do we get young people in? And I believe that they see images and they're like, that's not who I consider Jesus to be. But if you're saying that, if Jesus said taking care of the least of these, that means you have to leave the church. Likely the least of these, well, although it could be, but it's not in a congregation, because it's not, we're family. We'll take care of our own because they're our own. But the young people, I believe, are looking for action, looking for Christianity with legs, going outside of the building, going to places where marginalized people are, homeless shelters, students who are far behind scholastically, students that don't have the networks that other students have, or the resources that other students have. So we have to be those surrogates. We have to be those advocates. We have to be those people, the boots on the ground people, to say, here is something you need. Here is something you need to do. And not just, it's not just in feeding, but it's equipping them so that they can feed themselves, teaching them gardening, perhaps. The saying, if you teach a man to fish, he'll fish for a day. I mean, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And that should be our guiding memory as we go on, as we practice our Christianity. Any questions so far or statements?
Yes, please. In as much as that, going back to your initial question, what Christianity is, spiritual or political? When you take for example, in James, where it says pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to
Yep.
visit, care for orphans and widows in their
Yep.
trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world.
Mhm.
Inasmuch as we do that from taking it from within the walls of the church to outside of the walls, it is a spiritual attempt. Inasmuch as the government will sponsor programs such as TANF and or SNAP, TANF, Medicare, then it becomes political. The same effort to take care of the marginalized can come from only a spiritual place or only a political place, because then it involves budgets and lobbying and budgets or lack thereof. And then it's particularly political. Like, for example, Mayor Bowser's recent 2026 budget proposal, she is proposing to eradicate some of the 25% of the Medicaid budget. In that sense, it is political. And but when we begin to feed and teach the children to grow their food, or to sponsor food drives, or things that we do like the first Thursday in Zion, and distribute food, then it is spiritual. We don't have to depend on the government to dictate how we give, how we share, how we support. So I don't know if it can be both, or one at a time, one or the other.
That's a very good point. Did anybody have anything to say in response to that?
I think they're both integrated. I don't think you can separate them.
Well, it's funny because I think that, and it's a monumentous task, I think, I believe, but if we are guided more spiritually than we are by worldly things, then perhaps we're in the process of establishing a moral society. You know, everybody's not going to be a Christian. We know that, but there's Christian principle. There are atheists who still care for people, you know. But I think if we decrease the importance of politics and increase the importance of spirituality, we'll be better. I think that the US, you know, I think politics as we know it is an invented construct. Because in the Old Testament, their governance were judges. And they were judges from the tribe. There were people from the tribes, the 12 tribes, who came up and were chosen to be judges. And they only practiced when there was an issue. Then they sat down and somebody else took their place, and so on and so on. But they so strictly followed the Jewish law that theirs was a moral society much more than it was a political society as we know it. So I think if we, you know, we kind of made politics a power thing. And back then too, I mean, Caesar, he liked the power. Constantine liked the power. So many, we have made this a power thing, following the weight that political power might gain without relying and truly relying on what God said, on what Jesus said, that with spirituality, we're basically undefeatable. Is there another question? Okay. Carolyn?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi there.
Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking that whether or not something is political or spiritual, is largely dependent upon the motive behind the actions.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look at why the person is doing or why the organization is doing what they're doing to be able to determine whether or not it's spiritual or physical. I mean, spiritual or political. And there may be some overlap because, like you said, some atheists are very giving and they have a communal attitude. So we just have to look at the motive, I think, to determine where what is prescribing the particular behavior. Those were just my thoughts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm gonna, it's kind of loud. So I'm gonna finish the bottom half of this slide, but it's a matter of, it's a matter of action, and like Sister Harris said, motivation. So it's action and motivation that kind of distinguishes. And we know Jesus's motivation was to make things on earth as they are in heaven. So going back to what I was saying earlier, we need to put our Christianity in action, give it legs. And so Jesus, the political revolutionary, the Jesus who is as concerned about liberating us from the kingdoms of earth as about getting us into the kingdom of heaven, is the Jesus who is attractive and who is not so meek, rather a passionate as well as compassionate doer. So I think that reflects, Sister Harris, what you were saying about motive. Jesus was motivated by his passion and compassion to flip the society. And that's why they said he's here turning the world upside down. Next slide, please. Okay, so another motivation behind Jesus, other than God told him to be like this, and he is an iteration of God, but let's look at Jesus's background. And often, though not so much now, I think the prominence now is on how you've escaped your background, your upbringing, if it was not a positive experience. But and so we do things to either overcompensate or just say it happened to me and I don't want it to happen to anybody else, which goes to which also addresses, we've begun to take on the traits of the oppressor, but that's another story. But basically, if we look at Jesus's upbringing, then we can see that his human upbringing was like, I don't want anybody else to be like that. So we look at his upbringing. He came to earth in an oppressed flesh. He was a Palestinian Jew of a race of people who were stepped on, and we know continue to be stepped on, and soon will be stepped out if nobody comes to their rescue. He would have grown up with stories of conquest and oppression, because Jews, we know, have a thing that they tell their stories. So you do not forget the history. It should be Jewish. Never forget, because they're big with history and their history. So he would have grown up with stories of conquest and oppression, and he was a son of a people displaced and marauded by others. There were the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans. I mean, they were always conquering the Jews, always colonizing the Jews. And now, the Jews are colonizing the Jews. So his days were nurtured in great hostilities focused upon his kind, the sons of Israel. There was no moment at all in his life where he was free, just free to be Jesus. Any questions or statements about that? No questions or statements. Okay. So Jesus, reading this, thinking about this, we can say that Jesus took the attitude, I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. And if I have anything to do with it, it won't happen. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. Now, to say that Jesus was next slide, please. To say that Jesus was a political revolutionary is to say that the message he proclaimed not only called for change in individual hearts, but also demanded sweeping and comprehensive change in the political, social, and economic structures in his setting in life. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't the only poor one. Most of them were poor. Most of them had social economic challenges. And that was something else he wanted to, that's what he was trying to change. That's what he was like working inside through the people so that the people could exact the change. And I have one thing I want to read from you that reminds me of the moral budget demonstration or moral budget issue. Okay. This says, those who do not recognize anything revolutionary about Jesus regard him simply as a spiritual revolutionary who sought out to bring the world to a new spiritual relationship with God. They might even, this is Hendricks talking, they might even, pardon me, grant that Jesus is a social revolutionary, but only in the narrow relational sense that he sought to transform society by changing people's individual relationships without concern for forming institutions and structures that dominated people's lives and so ruthlessly circumscribe them till their life changes. That wasn't what I wanted to share. Okay, what they reject is the notion, people who believe that Christianity is not spiritual but political, is the they. And what they reject is the notion that Jesus was a political revolutionary, that he not only sought to address the symptoms of a people's suffering, but also that he sought to alleviate the systematic causes of their suffering. So those are the issues that we fight against now. We're fighting for our history to be read. We're fighting because Maryland electric bills are just going crazy. We're fighting and addressing things that affect us and our quality of life. So that's what Jesus is doing. But we also have to remember that it's not just us we're fighting for. We're fighting for those who have low voice or no voice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want some more discussion.
Like when you talked about us going out on June 10th, maybe some of us aren't affected about the things that they're trying to take away.
Right.
But the people surrounding around us will be affected. And if they're affected, we are affected.
Exactly.
So I think it is important that we show up. So I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah, thank you. That's another thing I also thought about going similar to your statement that with DC becoming so heavily segmented between the haves and the have-nots, crime is going to go. That's crime is going to go up. That's everybody's problem. Homelessness, that's everybody's problem. Being out, we're all in this together, regardless of what this is. And that's something that we don't get. I don't know what the thinking is behind tax cuts for the rich and taking everything away from us, but it's happening. And that's why that's, excuse me, also one of the responsibilities as a Christian to advocate, advocacy. Jesus was an advocate, so we have to follow his role.
Isn't that the reason Reverend Byrd is encouraging people to get involved on Juneteenth, to go down and protest and fight for what is right?
Right.
And let them know about many of the things that are going on currently.
Absolutely. And the reason we're so hyped about this is if there's a showing of Christians and in trying to enforce a moral budget, it has a little more weight than people standing on the sidelines. Like, well, what do you care? No. I'm here to show you what we believe morality is. And that's my 2 cents. Did you have something else to say? And then we'll go to.
Yeah, I think to sit silent and not fight is to be in agreement with this.
Exactly. My mother used to always say silence is a form of consent.
Yes.
Silence is a form of consent. Reverend V, hi.
Good morning, afternoon, everybody. So I have a question. I like, of course, what you're saying and the argument and the examples that you are bringing forth. But my question is, what about people who wonder, how can I get involved? Maybe protesting isn't their thing, like physically being there in the crowds, in the group. Maybe that's not their thing. Maybe they feel like how can I get involved if I don't really understand the fullness of this myself or the impact? Maybe they're wondering where do I start? Because sometimes it's not so much that people don't want to. It's two things. One, maybe they don't know how to get started. And then number two, maybe they don't understand what's the end goal, what's the objective, or what happens next. So it's great to say we do this because Jesus did it. and Jesus modeled it for us how to address societal ills and problems and shortcomings. And even in doing that, it came with risk, yes, and it came with dangers and all of that, yes. And today, we still face those same things. So then, how can we? This is a three-part question. This is my third part. How then do we speak to people who are concerned about their own health, safety, and well-being in the midst of these very outfront kind of protest involvement or engagements?
Okay. Tell me if I'm
And you
on the
don't have
right.
to answer those all by yourself. They can be for discussion.
Thank you. I would say one, word of mouth, and in word of mouth, hopefully we're also being educated. We're educating each other. As far as where do I fit in? What need do you see that's not being met? What makes your heart break? Does, hungry children make your heart break? Then, figure out how to go to that resource and contribute. If homelessness, go to that resource and contribute. And protesting is not always about standing with signs, rah, rah, rah. Protesting is also resistance. Protesting is also overcoming. So if somebody says, this is a long shot, if somebody says all 4-year-olds cannot go to school, so that's when we're to pair with some 4-year-olds and teach them ourselves. It's sort of like, so it's resistance, but it's sort of like maroonage, where the Maroons of the Caribbean islands, they're escaped slaves, and they sort of separated themselves from society and everything to do their thing and to have their life and have life abundantly. They're not necessarily Christian, but they live their Christian principle. I do it myself. And their little plot of land is eco-friendly. They're all about the ecology and each other. So, that's another one. Just be a maroon and just be like, okay, this is my little thing. We're going to do it ourselves, which is how one element of how the Freedom School got started back in the 60s. Like, I'll just do it myself. I'll take care of us. And so that's it. That's all I have to say. Anybody else? Michael Coley and then Tanya Covington.
Okay, thank you.
There's always risk in protest. During the civil rights movement, there was risk. People died. Mm-hmm. And true, everybody is not up physically or emotionally for the rigors of a protest. But like you said, there are other things you can do. We're in the process now of boycotting certain companies. Mm-hmm. So you might not be able to get out and maybe be able to physically boycott or protest, but you can not go to a store. That's mm-hmm. something you can do to do your part. So it's always a part that you can do. You just have to figure out what that thing is. If you're dedicated enough, there's always something to do.
Yep. And Tanya?
Yeah, so that's such a really good way position that Reverend McAlpine brought up. So I was reminded of Rosa Parks and Ruby Bridges. I'm also reminded of the labor movement and how that impacted so many lives in terms of jobs and labor. We just did that last Black History Month. That was our theme. But the physical capability of people being able to go out, like I have a compromised ankle, so I can't stand for long periods of time. And also resistance protests kind of raise a certain level of anxiety within me. So mm-hmm. There are, I agree, other ways to be participatory and active and proactive in protest. So everyone must pick up their swords and fight the battle the best way that they know how, and but be consistent and actively involved on whatever level.
Yeah, I think we need to raise our activity level. What's your name? I'm sorry. Latarsha. Okay.
So I also think it's circumstantial. It is circumstantial because I told myself that I would never go and protest. I have a love for seniors. So to hear about them trying to cut Medicaid, I'm like, oh, no, you're not doing that to my seniors. And I'm able. My body is able. So a person that's not able, if you have a young person that is coming to the church, grandkids or anything, talk to them. Tell them how much this will affect you. And they're the next coming up. Yeah. So like I said, it's circumstantial. Everybody's circumstances are different, but I think as an older person, as an elder, as a senior, it's important to tell us younger people how much this will affect you and allow us to fight for you, allow us to go out there for you. And that's it.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. I think many of us think, well, I don't have to worry about that. I got years ago, and don't do anything. But everybody prayerfully gets to that point where they have a need that they thought they'd never had. And then, I think word of mouth, we have social media, many platforms that we can just say, oh, you know what, let's have a meeting about XYZ. It's going to be hybrid and we're going to talk about this, and then, form ways of doing it. But I just think that. Anybody else?
You can also support many of the organizations that are working to address these problems financially. Exactly. Even if it's a small amount.
Yep.
The ACLU, they take on a number of cases for people who cannot afford to present the cases when they are being oppressed. Or the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP. And there are organizations that take care of the homeless. You can support them. So if you can't, I'm not going down on Juneteenth and be marching, but I can, support them in other ways.
Right. And thank you, Sister Tommy. Support is physical and monetary, but it's also in licking envelopes. It's also in, making phone calls. It's not just all feet, and I guess what I meant when I said boots on the ground, I just meant activity, involvement. This is what we need. Reverend V?
Yes, okay. Yes. So thank you everybody for your comments. I think they're all so cool and valuable. And the next thing I would just urge as a church and as a community, how do we remain informed? I love the fact that Reverend Byrd did the, is the protest working throughout the Lenten season. But I think it's really important that we also have in place next steps. So what happens after we go and do this protest on Juneteenth? What's the follow-up? Even if it's not a big community-wide follow-up, even if it's local to Zion, because that keeps people engaged too when they know, okay, there's going to be something that happens after this. And for me, those things kind of, in my mind, make sense. I want to know that I'm not just doing this one time, and maybe I am just doing it one time, and that's enough. But how do we monitor this going forward? Because it seems, and this is not a commentary on you, Donna, or anything, I'm just talking about life right now. It seems that oftentimes we get hit with things when it's urgent and this has to happen now, but how can we be more proactive in what's going on and stay informed if you're not a CNN watcher or if you're not constantly watching the government and the things that's on TV, the like city council is publicized, you can go and watch it in person or on TV. If you're not keeping up with it that way, how can the church then in turn help keep people informed or be made aware of like the Ward 4 clergy initiatives and things that they're doing? Again, not necessarily for you to answer. I don't want you to feel like all of these are for Reverend Vance to answer, but just general questions and thoughts.
I think
and
that's
then I'm gonna be quiet.
Oh, you don't have to. But I think that's an excellent point, and that's another that goes to what I was saying about how young people don't like to go to church because we're not doing anything, and it's that one and done type spirit that doesn't get us anywhere. The opponents look at us like, oh, they're just going to protest Tuesday and then, we'll forget about it. They'll forget about it. But that's the other thing. We can't allow the train to lose steam. We got to keep on going. We got to keep on going. And we also have to realize the platforms that are available to us. Oh, you want to reach so-and-so? They don't watch C-SPAN, they don't watch CNN, but they watch TikTok, Instagram, even Facebook, and any other social media platform there is. So I do agree. We have to keep on going so that we don't lose relevance. Anybody else? Tanya?
Yes. So Peggy, to piggyback on what Reverend McAlpine said once again, another reason why I don't go to protests outside and marches and stuff like that is because I feel like we are overmarched. Like the Million Man March, the Million Women's March, they had no staying power because we have young men out here now that have no clue. The affirmations that were made on that day, and the Women's March have no clue. Black women, a lot of the young girls have no clue as to the affirmations that were made within our community on that day. But in the 60s, it was staying power. And I'm a product of the 60s. And I remember the programs and SCLC and OIC and the Black Panthers. And it was staying power so much so that I have never forgotten it. So I'm a rebel against these social injustices. And I always try to remain involved in some way all the time. So, I participate in my ANC. I participate in just conversation. I want to know what happened to Know the Issues that was started at Zion, and we never had another Know the Issues gathering. It was very helpful. So there are a lot of things that we don't have staying power about and consistency about that we need to keep the fire burning and keep it going. And because it just seems like when we march all the time, it's just an emotional day. And we make signs and then they end up littering the streets and nothing is done after that. So, but that's not to discourage it. It's just to say that it needs to be a continuous energy that keeps going, not just out of emotion. Emotion doesn't get us anywhere. Yeah.
Thank you. Latasha?
So, as a young person that's always in the community, the churches and Christians have to show up. We have to show, and that is the disconnect with us young people and Christians. I don't know how I can say it because I'm a Christian myself, but if that's the disconnect. Yeah, that's the disconnect. We want to see the Christians more. We want to see them out there with us more, struggling with us, going through it. That's the disconnect. And so, yeah, consistency is important, but we need to figure out what in our surrounding areas is needed. And that's how we keep it going. Yeah. Because if we evaluate what's needed in the surrounding area, people in the surrounding area keep coming back and we keep it going. I just think more senior Christians should get out there with us young people and motivate us to get to the point that they are now. And that's to keep the momentum going. Us young people keep it going. But the elders are our foundation. And so, yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember the story Pastor Byrd has told us. I've heard it a couple of times, but when the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, they were doing a demonstration and everything like that, and he and some other preachers had gone down there, and the young people were like, "Why y'all here now? We needed you back then. We needed you, I guess, before it got to this point, and now you're here. No, this is our fight. You just go back to where you were, And so that's another thing that I understand what you're saying in that we all have to get into this. We all have to be in it. And, you know, Tanya said we're marched out. I think a march supplanted by something else, supported by something else, and, you know, on and on and on, then it becomes a cause, I think, you know, so that's it. Anybody else? Oh, that's the phone. I don't know what. Okay, would you go to the next slide, please? Okay. Where Jesus is recognized easily as a spiritual revolutionary, as he introduced a new way of having a relationship with God, he could very well be deemed a social revolutionary, in that he sought to change society by changing individuals. We said that before, we talked about it a little bit. He gave attention to institutions and structures that callously dominated people's lives, and so ruthlessly circumscribed, sorry, their life chances. He sought to address the symptoms of the suffering and sought to alleviate the systematic causes of their suffering. And we talked about that too. But one thing that sort of brought this point home is what I'm getting ready to read. And these are Hendricks quotes. My punctuation isn't good, but those are Hendricks quotes. And he also writes, consider the Lord's Prayer, in which Jesus instructs his disciples that whenever they pray,
send it to the wrong person.
That whenever they pray.
We hear you, Reverend McAlpine.
Okay, I'll start over. Consider the Lord's Prayer, in which Jesus instructs his disciples that whenever they pray, their first concern should be that Caesar's unjust governance and unjust will, as manifested in the imperial policies and laws, be replaced by the just governance and the just will of God. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And to make sure that these instructions were not misunderstood as mere abstract notions, Jesus carefully added, on earth as it is in heaven. So we can look at the Lord's Prayer as our mission statement, you know, on earth as it is in heaven. And then, you know, that'll be good. So in wrapping up, next slide, please. In wrapping up, I'm going to read the statement again. Christianity is spiritual, not political. And then we have different instances where Christianity is spiritual and is political. The first two, however, we get into Christian nationalism and white nationalism and right-wing evangelism. And I think these were, it was Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. These were, how can I say this? These were campaigns where religion was used as a tool to make you do what they wanted, to make us ascribe to their agenda. On the other hand, though, the civil rights movement was motivated by morality. So, and the churches, you know, some were for it, some were against it, but many were for it. You know, look at the preachers that, you know, Abernathy, Fauntroy, King, Mahalia Jackson, who did the letter writing that I was talking about. You know, so many other people who were churched people, you know, got behind that movement. Mm-hmm. And so where we have to we have to be conscientious of who is it, who's telling us to do this, why are they telling us to do this, what did they say before they came out with and announced this campaign? What have their actions done in the past? And you know, and then figure out if then it's up to you to delineate a spiritual movement, a spiritually political movement, or a politically spiritual movement. That's what we can do. Any questions or statements?
I think if you're going to support any organization, you should get some background on that organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, before you do anything toward them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, you know, knowledge of them will certainly help you make a decision in terms of what you can do to help that organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Sister Tommy. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'll pray us out. All hearts and minds are clear. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
I have 1 minute. Well, it'll take me a minute to pray.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, Sister Tommy. I love your comments. You're welcome. I'll be doing Bible study tonight. It's the same topic, but if you want to tune in. That'd be great. I'd love to have your support. If not, I know I have your support anyway. I'm just taking it. So let us bow our heads and thank God for this session that was interesting, that did spark some fire, especially under me anyway, to go out and do it, and not just do it, but maintain it, sustain it, come up with something that is sustainable. Lord, I depend on you and your Holy Spirit to put those ideas in our heads and in our hearts so that we can make a change, make a difference. And if not, Lord, give us an alternative to suffering. We may not show it right now, but somewhere in our minds, our bodies, our hearts, we are suffering because we simply do not know. So Lord, keep us in your care, keep us in your arms, wrap them around us, and let us do your will. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.